Let me do the official greeting. This is Robert Phoenix broadcasting to you live from Fredericksburg, Texas, also known as Flyover. So this is I'm attempting to move into the 21st century here. And for the last, since 2010, like when I started doing this, YouTube was kind of marginal. I mean, like there were people doing YouTube channels, but the technology for YouTube at that time was, looking back on it, fairly rudimentary. Like they didn't do live streaming. I mean, it's really expanded and exploded, and it's grown a lot. And so people who were doing like video work on YouTube back then were actually really skilled. And that's not saying that people aren't skilled now, but there's a whole suite of services that are available to get into YouTube and, of course, do your live streams, or like there's a whole network of opportunities, not just YouTube, but broadcasting on, other formats and other portals like Twitch and Facebook Live. So it's really exploded. So when I started off, it was really, the podcast was the big deal. And it kind of mirrors the evolution of radio to television. There was a period of time where radio was king. And then TV came along and, put radio clearly in a, second place medium or media. And then ultimately the internet came along and, kicked TV to a second place medium/media, with radio even being a notch below that now. So I've really always loved to do podcasting because you set it up, hit click, you've got an intro, you got an outro, and you're done. You're done. Now, you can do the same thing on YouTube if you have a nice little intro and, a nice little outro, and you can sit there and, in front of your camera and have your cat behind you and, broadcast out of your basement, and you can get, 25, 30,000 people to look at your video, which I think is great in a lot of ways. But I've always wanted to just sort of stay on the kind of the radio side. I like radio. I like the fact that you don't necessarily see me. And it's not because I'm a privacy freak. I just think that there's some inherent power in mystery. Not that I need to be mysterious. I don't need to be the Howard Hughes of podcasting, because if I wanted to be that, I'd be doing a pretty poor job of it, to be honest with you. But I've been really wrapping my head around the whole YouTube experience, and it really kind of, tipped things off for me was the last time that Steve and Chris and I got together. We actually videotaped it, and I turned it into a podcast, and I used the video on YouTube and got a fair amount of looks. So what I'm doing now is I'm working on actually capturing this video or this podcast through video while I started it yesterday, and I wasn't really happy with the results. So I didn't put it up on YouTube, but I am going to put today's show up on YouTube. So when you go to YouTube, what you'll get is you'll get two versions. You'll get the regular audio if you just want to listen, or if you are so moved and compelled to actually see me look into a camera and talk, you'll have that version too. And I know that YouTube actually recognizes those kinds of interfaces more than it does just audio, because that's their business model, right? It's a video service. That's how they make money with it. So this is me being dragged into the 21st century, mainly because I'm going to have a really honest moment. I'm really sick and tired of getting 200 views for my podcast. Now, I'm not sure if that's because YouTube is fucking with me. I'm not that paranoid, although certainly people have suggested it. I think it's part of the algorithm, and I think that they prioritize video a bit more, even if it's just audio with slides and stuff like that. It comes in as a video. You know what I'm saying? So this is my quest to remain relevant, with also trying to continue to stay, in my center and evolve this. If we don't evolve, what do? We die. We die if we don't evolve. So evolution, being pushed, being challenged is really important. Now, one of the things that's been great about me doing the audio stuff is I've been flying under the radar. So if I said David Hogg, if I talked about David Hogg, or if I talked about Parkland, which I have, man, nothing really happened to me. But if I go in video, well, now I have to deal with a new set of guidelines, a new set of, in some ways, talking points. So it'll be interesting for me to see how much I can push this envelope of free speech, because with the podcast stuff, I've been kind of flying under the radar. So we're going to give it a whirl. And today I will even talk about David Hogg, and I will talk about Parkland. But I'm going to talk about it in a way that is non-conspiratorial. However, when I do talk about it and how I'm going to wrap this up into a context, you'll see that there is something bigger and higher going on here. And it's not just the fact that somebody died and nobody died, or, that David Hogg is really 23 years old, or he's really a high school student, or that it's been astroturfed and synthetically marketed and put together versus it being this really organic outburst of youth and spirit and coming of age and coming online. Some of those things, I might touch on, but it'll be coming from a different perspective. So welcome to the Friday FARcast. It is the 18th of May. We're getting very, very close to Gemini. That's going to be wild. Sun in Gemini, Mars in Aquarius. Hold on. Hold on to yourself. So I've spent the last 24 hours really, really immersing myself as much as I can into the Q Anon material. Like, I have visited QTubers, and the QTubers that are supposedly, the creme de la creme, the cream of the crop, the people who know what they're doing. Praying medic. YouTube is a trip. The times we're living are a trip, right? I mean, just look at that name. Praying medic. Now, I'm not here to diss the guy, but I cannot help but notice that you're really trying to get a message across, right? Praying medic. Well, first of all, I pray. So there you go. This qualifies me as somebody who's being devout, serious. Take me seriously. I pray. And not only that, I'm a medic, which means I probably was in the Army. Praying medic. Or maybe now he's in some form of, I don't know, first responder mode. But the names alone are fascinating, right? Praying medic. Clearly one of the guys that's considered on the ball with the Q thing, on the Q ball. So I spent some time with Praying Medic. Very devout, very serious patriot, very serious Christian. And here's this interesting thing, right? There's this kind of interesting interface now that's happening with QAnon, Christianity, in kind of an esoteric thing. Have you noticed that? That's really fascinating. Because I know that there are Christians that are like, because there's Christian symbolism, and there's a sense of righteousness and devoutness, and it's bound up in certain points in the evolution of Q Anon. And I think we're on Q 3.0 right now, which is what I've been able to determine. So I went to his website. I went to Michael Trim. Can I just give you a breakdown of that website, that YouTube channel, briefly? And I love going to these YouTube channels. They're so eclectic and different and weird, and they all have their own little charm. Michael Trim has the best intro. I mean, I don't know who created it. I don't know if he did it. I don't know how much money he spent on it, but that intro is really good. It's like X-Files, really good and timely, right? You see that intro, like, man, this is a great fucking intro. I like this intro. And then he's got a green screen, and behind him, American flag and the White House. So it looks like he's giving kind of a CNN style news presentation or Fox News presentation. Looks very professional. He's wearing a suit. And then he starts talking. And after the first 3 minutes, I was ready for a nap. And the guy's getting 50,000 views on his YouTube page. And I'm just sitting there scratching my eyes, like, great. I love it. I love the intro, green screen, professional. But somebody needs to tell Michael Trim that he's got to turn the personality level up to about at least 5 or 6. And again, I don't want to, it doesn't match. And maybe this is the thing about YouTube that is beautiful, right? Well, it's alternative media. It doesn't do the same thing that regular media does. Well, you're presenting yourself as somebody who's that's like a really, really professional kind of delivery. It's a professional production. And if you're going to be professional, go all the way. He's got the personality of a board op. I'm sorry. I mean, if you're trying to convey, and then I look at the information he's conveying, and it's okay, but it's a lot of scraping of the Q material. And there are some people who are good at interpreting it. I was watching Lionel. I dove into Lionel. I swear to God, I think Lionel was talking about me on one of his videos. I swear to God, because I've been replying to his Twitter feed a little bit, and I bet you Lionel checked me out. Well, I think so. I have that feeling. And I love doing my Lionel impersonation because I've been listening to Q and all the Qs and all the Anons. And well, by the way, I love those Anons because, I have never, ever, ever had this kind of phenomenon in my life. No, I've not. You see, when I was young, we had somebody called Deep Throat, okay? Deep Throat. Oh. But Lionel's waxing on and on and on and on and on and on and on about Q. He just loves Q. And he actually makes some good points. And he gets into this territory where it's kind of like the whole Carlos Castaneda trip, right? Carlos Castaneda wrote some really good books, some really interesting ideas. Things like the assemblage point. Fantastic. Great stuff. Finding your spot, finding your power spot. Castaneda was a genius. And Castaneda made 90% of that shit up. Does that devalue Castaneda? There was this book back in the mid-90s, Mutant Message from Down Under. People loved that book. Loved it. It was about this woman, Margot, what's her name? I forget her last name. She winds out going out to the outback and hanging out with the Aboriginal people, getting all these great messages and spiritual teachings from them. Total lie. Total. Does that invalidate her book? Does that invalidate some of the, there, in some cases, I would say the answer clearly is yes. And I can tell you at least 3 or 4 other spiritual teachers or spiritual types who claim to have been somewhere, gone to a place, met a holy man or woman, got a message, and then brought it back to the masses, and it's mostly made up. If you want to go back to the one event that kind of changes everything in the 20th century, it is when Mark Prophet goes to Mount Shasta and is supposedly taken inside the mountain where he meets the ascended masters and becomes schooled in the role that the ascended masters, the great white brotherhood, have played in humanity, in the history of the world, and continue to play that role. And out of that, Mark Prophet starts this whole I am spiritual cosmology. There are other people that are connected to this. He's not the only one, but he's the one that popularizes it. Now, did Mark Prophet actually go inside that mountain? We don't know, but it's a hell of a story. And out of it, we have Saint Germain and Kuthumi and Kuan Yin and the 7 rays. And I was into that stuff when I was in my 20s, except I had to go 5 rays higher. I was into the 12 rays. I was initiated into the 12 rays. The best thing that came out of that was, and some people may argue with me on this, was his wife, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, who winds up taking her troop of true believers up to Montana, where they are basically, creating their post-apocalyptic doomsday bunker. But she was really switched on. And there are a number of recordings of her and Anthony Sutton. And it's like such odd bedfellows. And Anthony Sutton is actually giving talks at the ranch in Montana, the compound in Montana. And Elizabeth Clare Prophet and Anthony Sutton are like on such a tight wavelength. And in some ways, it actually makes sense because Anthony Sutton is an Aquarian. And he starts off in academia. He's a teacher at Stanford. He goes and writes a book about skull and bones and changes his life. And if you ever want to have a solid grounding in the game that's being played, even to this moment, even to this day, you have got to experience Anthony Sutton. You can read his books, but I'm telling you, there are at least 6 videos on the internet where he gives 2 or 3 hour talks, and he breaks the game down. He breaks the game down from the rise of the Third Reich to the rise of the Soviet Union, how the same players were behind both. He talks about education. He talks about skull and bones. I mean, you want to get the deep primer, start with Sutton. He's the guy that brings in the Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. He's the guy that brought it into the mainstream. But he's got these talks with Elizabeth Clare Prophet that are mind-blowing. And she's like, she's right there. And she became very aware, right? In a lot of ways, Elizabeth Clare Prophet and Anthony Sutton were a Q Anon before there was a Q Anon. And the reason I'm saying that is because Elizabeth Clare Prophet was a patriot. She was a total patriot. I wonder if I should play my I'm gonna do. God, I wish I could do this. Let me see if I could do this real time. I have a track that I made out of Elizabeth Clare Prophet's one of her speeches. It's like a Smithsonian Folkways recording. It's called "Messages from a Doomsday Cult." And when I saw it on the record CD bin, I didn't know what it was about, but I knew I had to have it. So I bought it and I went home and I listened to it. I was like, holy shit, this is Elizabeth Clare Prophet. And and what she was doing was fascinating. So basically what it is, it's a Sunday morning service. And she is looking at the spirit of the devil in rock and roll. And they're calling out all of these rock artists. And I love it. They say David Bowie. Prince is in there. They're calling them all out because what she's doing is she's setting up a remote exorcism. It's so fascinating. And you would think that this was like a fundamentalist church, but she's invoking these energies of the seven rays and the ascended masters to come in and clean this shit up. And then she goes into this, they go into this chanting, this high speed, hoomy chanting that is like, when you listen to it, blows your mind. And so I did like an 11-minute hard techno dance track with this thing. I used to play for one of my intros, and to this day I still get dinged by YouTube because I'm using that intro, or I'm using her voice, and other people have used it for their tracks. And so because somebody used it for their track and they're on CD Baby or whatever, the technology, the algorithm says that, well, they own the rights to it because it's in their system. It's bullshit. It's public domain, and every time I get one of those, I have to fight it and say, hey, public domain, anybody can use it. And 99.9% of the time I win, and I have one. They stop doing it. But then they go into this Humi singing, man, and I made like a 12-minute track. And when you make a track, you got to go back and listen to it again and again and again and again and again, right? So I was in this like intense Humi singing for close to 10 hours one day. And by the time I was done, I was like totally altered. I was like in another plane of consciousness. It was totally fascinating. And so Claire Prophet was a real patriot. She was a total patriot. And she had this interesting mind meld with Anthony Sutton. But the story with Elizabeth Clare Prophet goes back to her husband, Mark. Did Mark Prophet actually go into the mountain? Did he actually meet with the ascended masters? Right? Did Gurdjieff, when he essentially, came out of the Caucasus Mountains or wherever Gurdjieff descended from, did Gurdjieff really have contact with the remarkable men that changed his life? What about Nicholas Roerich? The same deal, right? And in some cases, the teachings are very interesting. You can go into Gurdjieff and you'll find really interesting pieces of wisdom and depth psychology. Gurdjieff never was able to take somebody into another state of consciousness. He couldn't. And when you see accounts of certain people that, well, like for instance, when Paramahansa Yogananda got hit in the chest by Vivekananda, he went into like a completely altered state of consciousness. Completely. And at that moment, he knew it was his teacher. I don't think Gurdjieff ever had those powers. That was one of the complaints or laments of the students of the work, that Gurdjieff could take him to a certain point, and that was it. And I think that that's fine, by the way. I think it's better than fine, to be honest with you. So when I look at the Q Anon phenomenon, and this is what Lionel was talking about yesterday, does it really matter? It doesn't really matter if Q really exists. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't care. You know why? Because it's such an interesting ride. I mean, think about it. Just think about it. Just one tiny second. I know that second's an eternity, but think about it. He says it doesn't matter because you're getting some goodies along the way. Now, I actually kind of understand this. And I'm not going to be reactionary here because I get what he's saying. Because this is what I was saying about Trump. When Trump was running up to the election, I kept saying, look, you may not be able to trust him. And if I were his business partners, I wouldn't trust him. And it's in his chart. Mercury square Neptune. Okay? Sun-Uranus conjunction, opposing the moon. But I did say there's energy here. There's energy. The energy is interesting. The energy is about breaking constraints, breaking social constraints and social order. And that's the Sun-Uranus conjunction. And I've talked about this, and I've said this before. I'll say it again if you're new to my channel, because this is going on YouTube, that Trump has given us two really significant gifts. He's given us the key to unlocking politically correct thinking. He's given us that key because there are a lot of people who are now starting to talk about things that they didn't talk about before, which is kind of interesting because this leads us into a whole series of potential dilemmas. It's kind of like Trump is Prometheus, or Trump is God, you know, and Prometheus stole fire from the gods. Right? It's a whole Luciferic thing, but there's this gift, theoretically, that was bestowed upon the humans. But now the humans get to use it against God in some ways, right? So we now have this ability to unlock the vaults of our minds, which had been put into place by the politically correct social consensus. And again, for a lot of those people, that's a scary thing. And a lot of those people have a lot of weird shit locked up. You know, you have people that have been passed over, you know, for jobs due to, you know, some quota, right? And they're pissed off about it. They have other people who have other issues. You know, part of the issues might be the fact that, you know, all of a sudden, you know, their husband or their wife left and they did it under strange circumstances. And, it checks one of these boxes. And to say that, you know, my wife became a raging feminist and did all these things and ultimately left me for a woman, which has happened. You know, and there can be other versions of that. Wherever these things are locked up inside of somebody, accessing them and talking about them at the first stages can be awkward. It can be awkward, and it can be it can get into this area of charge, right? So let's say you lost a job due to affirmative action. Or let's say you lost out on a scholarship due to some kind of quota deal. And you know for a fact that this is the case, and you've buried it for a long time. And it's ground away at you, and all of a sudden the bonds of political correct thinking come off. And it's like, you know, and it could be, and that may be more than one incident. So at the first stages of this phenomena, it can get awkward. And what's really interesting too is, like, as people try to untie this stuff, there are these like cops There are these, the thought police, and they're everywhere. They're everywhere. So there's this young guy named Nick Bosa. Plays football for Ohio State. He's probably going to be the first pick in the NFL draft. And he had a tweet. The tweet said, Beyonce's music sucks. Then he had another tweet that said, Colin Kaepernick is a jerk. And then he had another tweet that was, I don't know. Oh, the other tweet was, I don't like the Black Panther movie. I don't think it's the worst Marvel movie ever. Black Panther movie. Now, what is he doing? Is he like exercising his free speech on Twitter because he doesn't think that the Black Panther movie is the best Marvel movie ever? In fact, it's the worst. Is he exercising his freedom of speech by saying things Colin Kaepernick's a jerk? Is he exercising his freedom of speech that he thinks that Beyonce's music sucks? No, I've never seen the Black Panther, so I can't comment on whether or not it's the worst Marvel movie of all time. I do think Beyonce's music sucks, but I also think Miley Cyrus's music sucks. I think Katy Perry's music sucks. I think Rihanna's music sucks. Okay, so just across the board. And I do think Colin Kaepernick is not a jerk, but I think he's completely misguided and has been played like a fool, like a dupe. But what happened is that there was a columnist, what's his name, Mike Winfield. It's either Mike Whitfield or Mike Winfield. And he brought this up. He brought this up as an example that Nick Bosa is racist. And I think it's ridiculous, and I think it's dangerous because the thought police have been dispatched, and they're there, and they're waiting. They're just waiting to pounce on the one thing that somebody says that puts them in a camp where they can be demeaned, written off, and then further this agenda, this narrative, which is this bipolar divide and conquer narrative, whether they're doing it on purpose or not. They are the dim-witted agents of duality. So I heard about this on a sports. This is a sports talk show, and one of the guys on the show is Jason Whitlock. I love Jason Whitlock. He's not everybody's cup of tea, but I also watch Shannon Sharpe. And Shannon Sharpe used to play football for the Baltimore Ravens, Denver Broncos. Incredible, incredible football player. And not just an incredible football player, but great charisma, great magnetism. They would mic him up, and he was like quotable and funny. And I watch him in the morning with Skip Bayless, and there isn't a day that goes by that Shannon Sharpe doesn't play the race card. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. So I watch Shannon Sharpe. I watch where he's at. I want to see if he's evolving. I want to see if people evolve. Jason Whitlock basically is the politically incorrect version. He's like the doppelganger of the reverse doppelganger of Shannon Sharpe. Jason Whitlock agreed with me over the fact that this is ridiculous, and this guy was trying to establish some kind of street cred. This is what happens, and this is where we are unlocking the mind lock, and Donald Trump gave that. He gave that gift to us, and I'm grateful for that, to be honest with you. And I've been pushing that boundary for a while. Now, all of a sudden, people are like, wow, I can start to say certain things. But it's going to be interesting because one of the things that's, if you're really into free speech and you really promote it and the freedom of ideas, then when you get into like the forbidden territory, the third rail, then where do we define, redefine, where are the boundaries of how free that speech is? So it's like, you gave us the gift. Now, guess what? You get to deal with the fact that we're now examining everything. And this is what's going on. Everything's being examined for the most part. And this is why it's being termed the Great Awakening, because things are being examined. The rocks are being turned over. And if you're fully committed to that, and I mean fully committed, no stone, and I mean no stone should be left unturned. None. So this is when Trump was running for office. I saw it happen. I'm like, man, get into this energy. It's about the energy. Whether or not he's able to deliver on his promises, whether or not he's going to be able to drain the swamp, whatever happens, right? It's the energy. Now, the problem is, here's the challenge or the dilemma, is that people don't understand that you can like take the energy and go like this, and that you don't have to, fall in lockstep and just agree with everything, And what Lionel was talking about with Q Anon was to some extent what I was talking about with Trump. Like, what's the harm? What's the harm? Isn't patriotism good? I think so. Is believing the country good? What about God? Are these things bad? What's the harm? Well, I agree. And I think there's a lot of energy there. My piece is that you just have to be clear where the energy is leading you, right? You just have to be clear about it. You got to be checking in. You can't just sign off on that box. You just sign off on that box. You just check that box. You're doing the same thing that the brain dead Christians did when George Bush was president. I'm sorry. The megachurch brain dead Christians. Christianity was a version of QAnon for the Republicans at that point in time. And it allowed Bush to go into the Middle East and completely destroy Iraq and start this cycle of violence and regime change. And now it's like, it's pulling people apart, right? But it was so set up, or was set up in such a way that people were so traumatized after 9/11. Please just do something. Fuck. Nothing, this has never happened to us before. What happened after 9/11 is like that scene in Platoon where Barnes, played by Tom Berenger, in what might be one of the greatest roles of all time, by the way. After they get jacked up in a village and the squad, the platoon, loses some guys, Barnes has had enough. And he goes into a village and he is the angel of death. He's like the cousin of Colonel Kurtz. And everybody, and I mean everybody, even Oliver Stone's character, played by Charlie Sheen, gets into it. They are looking for revenge, bloody revenge, and they don't care. And this is what happened after 9/11. Bush and the Army and the armed forces became our version of Barnes. America didn't care. All they cared about was closure. They wanted some kind of closure because it had never happened to us before. And they picked a country, and they picked a religion that aligned with a Christian belief system that allowed them to sacrifice the other. And that was, I believe, a very unsophisticated early version of Q Anon. Okay. Now, that said, Q Anon tends to be much more broad and esoteric than what was happening during the Bush administration. But look where that belief led us. The full belief in our so-called president, the belief in the fact that Iraq had rods and yellow cake. Oh, just go do it. We don't care. Get that bad man, Saddam Hussein, because he was behind. He wasn't behind it. And even the Arabs that they claimed were behind it weren't behind it either. Do a little homework there, kids. So just be careful where this is leading you. Check in with it. Just don't check the box. Just don't remain mindless. Okay? There's some interesting things in there. One of the things through my deep dive, I was using deep dive back in 1999, 1990. I used to be a journalist. I used to work for a crazy magazine called Mondo 2000. Look it up. So deep dive is part of my vocabulary. Everybody's doing a deep dive. No, deep dive, deep dive, deep dive. I did a deep dive yesterday. And it was, where did I go? It was, I went to this. It was a forum between this guy, Unirock, Nathan from Lifting the Veil. I actually like Nathan. I think Nathan is a little gullible, though. Let me just say that. And then this guy, DeFango. DeFango is very interesting. It's fun watching him get really high and do his podcast. I actually think he's quite smart, to be honest with you. And then this guy, Unirock, who's apparently he's used to be in Iraq or someplace like that. His presentation is like so different than Michael Trim's. I mean, it's chaotic. It's like graphics everywhere, and people are chatting. And he was there. And then this guy, Baruch the scribe, who is connected to Q, because it was his board on 8chan that Q eventually moved over to and began to use, the different trip code and all that stuff, right? Okay. So one of Baruch's motivating pieces around all of this, he talked about this briefly, is child trafficking. Now I'm getting around to the actual title of the show. It's about child trafficking, exploitation, ritual sacrifice, all these gruesome things that we know do exist. To what level they exist, well, that remains to be seen. I mean, we know about Sandusky and Penn State, and we know about what happened with the Franklin scandal, and I mean, that stuff it's old news. The McMartins. Now, there are some people who believe that none of that is true, by the way, that the Franklin scandal was made up, the McMartin thing was made up. So you'll find people that will, like Jordan Peterson, doesn't believe the McMartin thing happened. He thinks that it was just a form of paranoid mania. Now you ask yourself, is Jordan Peterson covering for them? I don't know. Or is that just his professional opinion, and that's how he's kind of built his, the columns of his mind around, and those are inviolate spaces, because if they are violated, then does Jordan Peterson's personal psychological structures crumble? I don't know. But if you look back on this, and I was thinking about this, well, that's really interesting, that his prime motivating factor is about the sanctity of kids, the innocence of children, And being able to stop the trafficking, to stop the slaughter of the innocents, to stop the feasting on their innocent energies, so that these people who are extremely dark and seem to prey off of their very innocent energy and their freshly harvested organs or whatever it is, right, get to prolong their lives. I mean, that's really sort of the pit, right? That's the pit of the rabbit hole. That is the pit in hell, the rabbit hole. You know, the whole child abduction, child trafficking thing. You guys go down that rabbit hole, and that is the abyss at the bottom of it all. Okay. Now, remember, this was part of the revelations of WikiLeaks, and it was October. It was October of 2016, just a month before the election. And that WikiLeaks stuff came out, and I think it was a game changer. I was all for the WikiLeaks material coming out. But prior to that, I had been very skeptical of Julian Assange. I've been skeptical of everybody. I'm even skeptical of myself, okay? That's how skeptical I am. I had a big skeptical moment yesterday. And I've done work on Julian Assange. I've looked at his chart. I looked where he came from. He comes from this really weird community in Australia where they gave the kids LSD. And I actually was having an exchange for somebody in the community that was there, and he had a different name then. And they told me that, you know, he was never a part of what was going on, but it was a part of his upbringing. It was a part, he was there. Julian Assange was, you know, he was brought up in a very strange and bizarre environment where all the kids had the same haircut. They were like the blonde version of Mo from the Three Stooges. Look it up. Look at my website, robertphoenix.com. Look up Robert Phoenix, Julian Assange. So I was really skeptical of WikiLeaks. I'm like, man, okay, drop some shit that is really important. Like, come on, let's go. Let's see some 9/11 stuff. Because that's the, you know, that is it. 9/11 is the Gordian knot to all things. Q Anon never talks about 9/11. Although if there's enough chatter about 9/11, I'm sure Q Anon will, like they'll say, we need to talk about 9/11. 9/11. What kind of symbolic language can we invoke about 9/11? Oh, did you know that President Trump visited a 7-Eleven at 2 p.m.? What's 2 plus 7? It's 9. 9/11. Bada bing. I mean, okay. But nobody ever talked about that with WikiLeaks. No, there was no drops. There was some interesting stuff. Mildly. Certainly turned, what's her name? Chelsea Manning into a star. Man, the alt-right loves Chelsea Manning. They love them some Chelsea Manning. That's great. Chelsea Manning, byproduct of a military family. Look, I did work in Chelsea Manning. I got into Chelsea Manning's chart. I went in with a razor blade with Chelsea Manning. Look it up. Robert Phoenix, Chelsea Manning. I've got so much stuff on my website. But I was there like, you know, years ago. But I had a serious amount of mistrust for Assange and the whole process. And then we had the big box. I always thought WikiLeaks limited hang. And we have the October stuff, and it changed everything. What was in the October stuff? It was the Podesta material. And there was stuff in there about the art and Tony Podesta and John Podesta. And then we went down the rabbit hole with Comet Ping Pong Pizza and PizzaGate. And here's where the children come into play. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't true. There's a lot of high strange here. There's a lot of darkness. And when you get somebody like Macaulay Culkin, who clearly exhibit signs of abuse and molestation. And he has a band where they changed all the lyrics to pizza. There's some insider leakage going on here. There's a lot of insider leakage. But here's where I'm taking this. When we go back and we look at the turning point for the first Gulf War, the turning point for the first Gulf War was when, I forget her name now, but she was this young Iraqi gal whose father was like an Iraqi businessman, had all these business ties, all these business connections. I mean, you know, he was a total political operative for the United States in Iraq. His daughter, this is before we got hip and sophisticated. His daughter went to Washington, D.C. She went before Congress, and she testified that Saddam Hussein was using chemical weapons on children. And there was some footage that they were able to scrape, and then that was the justification of World War III. Okay, the Gulf War. And so and we know now that was bullshit, that didn't happen. But it was using the energy of children as a form of exploitation, coercion, and even to some extent extortion. Because if you don't do something about this, then you're culpable, right? You're culpable. And I think America has this weird kind of like guilt trip in some ways about the Holocaust. Now, when it was happening, when World War II was going on, nobody, and I've talked to people who were alive during that time, nobody heard peep about the Holocaust. Nobody heard peep about the camps. Okay? Nobody. Now, one can make a case that would be something along the lines of, well, maybe that wasn't happening. Maybe there wasn't really a Holocaust, which is why people didn't hear about it. Or one can make another case that there was a Holocaust, but the news media was controlled. The same news media that did not tell you that Ford and Behrman Brothers and General Electric and a number of other American companies were involved in the industrialization of Germany right after Adolf Hitler got elected. Americans didn't hear about that, right? So one could, again, use that kind of logic. Well, the reason why you didn't hear about the Holocaust, because, well, the press was controlled. And believe it or not, these companies were actually behind Germany. Okay? Fair enough. Fair enough. So what took place is the fact that people were being given misinformation. And this kickstarted us into the Gulf War. And it was an act of aggression, which has really gone unabated since then. We had a brief respite. We turned our attention to the Balkans. Then we went back to Iraq, obviously. But it always comes down to children. And it's, look what happened. Look what happened in Syria. Did you see what happened? That fucker Assad, he gassed those children. Let's go in and take care of that son of a bitch. Because innocence is a currency. It's a total currency. And that's what they prey upon. Yes, both sides prey upon innocence as currency. And it's so, well, it's like, who can resist that, right? I mean, it's part of who we are. It's part of it mirrors the parts of ourselves that have been violated who hasn't been triggered as a kid? Who hasn't been traumatized as a kid? If you hadn't been triggered and traumatized as a kid, God bless you. You should create more kids. By the way, it takes about at least 3 generations to cycle through generational trauma. It doesn't help if we're passing along generational effects of things like vaccines. I want to talk about this. Maybe I'll do some Monday. I got too much to talk about today. But I encountered this woman who is a doctor, and she's in Enid, Oklahoma. And this woman is a piece of work, man. I think her name is Evie Kim. I'll talk about her on Monday. I'll save her for Monday. But we've all been traumatized as children, right? It's part of the deal, man. It's what happens when you're born on Earth. You get your shit traumatized and triggered. So then when these things happen in the world, right? Now we look at the motivating principle, whether it's behind QAnon to go out and get the child traffickers, or whether it's to go get Saddam Hussein because these children have been theoretically gassed, or whether it's, excuse me, or whether it's the hog posse. And by the way, we've had another shooting today in Santa Fe, Texas. I think 8 kids now. The shooter's in custody. I was just wondering. I was hoping, I was praying that there wouldn't be another shooting before the damn school year let out. They had to squeeze one more in. One more in. Because David Hogg's Twitter feed was getting pretty stale. I follow David Hogg. Oh, boy. Oh, boy. One last shot across the bow before summer comes on. I haven't looked into this Santa Fe thing at all. I haven't. But usually 3 things, there's one of 2 things is possible and equally true. One, either it's real and you get a kid who's like Nicholas Cruz and he's troubled and he's on meds and, you know, he's been tweaked and torqued and twerked and worked over to the point where his trauma bleeds and becomes this act of violence and aggression. Or maybe it's another, double F. F2. F squared. Figure that one out. Maybe it's a combination of the 2. Bottom line is now we got to deal with it. And it's what about kids? Kids. The kids will win. Kids. The children's crusade. The march and slaughter of the innocents. And both sides are using children as a motivation, as a motivating force. And now, look, that's not to say that there aren't things inside of QAnon that people are looking at and learning from. But correct me if I'm wrong, the baseline and the foundation for what's going on the Q-tip happens to deal with children. And this is clearly what this guy, Baruch the scribe, was talking about. And if you go back and look at WikiLeaks and what was happening just prior to the election, the bed and the foundation of QAnon was actually created, right? That was like the fertile soil for QAnon, was the WikiLeaks, the WikiLeaks material, the children. And you got a planet of people who, as children, have been really fucked over. And some of it's intentional, and some of it's just what happens in the collateral damage of life. We all have our wounds. Some wounds, I can tell you stories, clients that make your toes curl. I've got my own stories around what happened to me in childhood. We see these. So today's show is, and I'm not saying that these things aren't real or true, that they could be equally true. I noticed a typo. I've got to change that. That is the exploitation of innocence. It is driving social programming. Or in the case of Q Anon, I would say maybe even antisocial programming. It's the fuel. It's the fuel and the bed of what's underneath it all. And both sides now have it. Just wait. Oh, man, you're going to see a lot of David Hogg. A lot of David Hogg and the Parkland Six. I don't know anything about the shooting in Santa Fe. I haven't studied it. Today is supposed to be the first day of Ramadan. I don't think so. I think it was like 2 days ago, if I'm not mistaken. But we're clearly in Ramadan. And there are people, and somebody put this up on Facebook today. They're looking at this as a sacrifice, right? And here we go. It's like, it's a symbolism, a sacrificial symbolism. And that stuff is true, by the way. I mean, there are things that happen. They happen at specific times. And they're part of a sacrificial calendar. But I'm not sure this fits into like the sacrificial offering for Muslims at the time of Ramadan. I'm not sure about that. I am not an Islamophobe, although I'm also not a fan of relocating millions of people from one culture and one country to another. Okay, it's not my thing, especially under false pretenses. Apparently now, is it Holland or Sweden that they have like the highest amount of STDs that they've ever experienced, and they're like exotic STDs. They don't have to do this shit. Oh boy. And even then, right? Like, look at that. They would bring these refugees over and they'd call them kids. And they're like 23 years old. They're not children. But again, it was this like passport for exploitation. It's like the license for exploitation. As long as you have kids involved, shit, you can do anything. Pretty much, right? You can justify just about anything. It'll be interesting to see where they link child trafficking. I mean, what if Iran somehow becomes this hub of child trafficking? And you've got the Q-tippers who are now fueled by this exploitation of innocence or the desecration of innocence. Shit, let's go there. Let's get these motherfuckers. By the way, I think if you're going to go to a place like that, it's probably Saudi Arabia. And speaking of Saudi Arabia, hello, where is Prince Salman? There's some indication that that prince, he gone. Now, of course, maybe he just went to Camp David with Trump. Trump just came back from Camp David again. You know what goes on at Camp David. Cloning. For a long time, by the way. That's old information. I wonder if that's going to happen. I wonder if Q's going to start doing the cloning drops. That'll be interesting, huh? I wouldn't be surprised if Trump is cloned at this point, by the way. I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's like there were two versions of Bush. There might be at least three versions of Trump at this point. But yeah, Prince Solomon gone. See ya. It's like, we know what happens when you bring a bunch of Saudi royalty into the Riyadh Hilton and torture them and get the keys to their finances and money? There's a good chance you set yourself up for retribution. That's interesting, huh? Keep your eye on that one. Now, North Korea, kind of off, it's like, oh, here we go. All the great statesmanship and all the great whatever it is that went into shutting down North Korea now looks like, may not happen because they want all North Korea's nukes, if they even have nukes. I mean, really, people, let's be clear. We're living in a time where news and information is really tenuous. Like the world is becoming this fractalized image before our very eyes. I'll give you an example. Like I was on Twitter and I scanned the tweets of the insufferable Jack Posobiec, who had, like many other conservatives, found a video where these Muslim martyrs were scratching their heads. You've seen the video, right? They're wrapped in these cloths, canvas. It goes like this. Well, that video is from 2014. Debunked. Video of fake dead Palestinians exposes pre-Israel propaganda. The video circulated on social media claiming to be evidence that Hamas is faking deaths in Gaza does not actually portray what has been claimed. And not only that, the footage is more than 4 years old. The video was shared among pro-Israel social media users in the wake of Monday's Great Return March protests in Gaza, in which Israeli fire killed at least 60 people. People shared it as proof that Hamas is either faking the number of deaths reported after Monday's unrest or is manipulating people into feeling sympathy for the Palestinian cause. However, the video actually dates back to 2013. It has been used as an anti-Palestinian propaganda since at least 2014, when Israelis' Operation Protective Edge war on Gaza saw more than 2,200 Palestinians killed. 22. More than 1,462 of whom were civilians, according to the UN. So it's total bullshit. But so many people were like ready to use that and justify their POV. And we're at a time now where when you actually confront them on it, nothing happens. They don't say, gee, you're right, I was a fool. I was a fool and a dummy for actually believing that. I should have checked it out. See, this is really important, man. We cannot jump the gun. When something happens and it looks like it conforms to your version of reality, whatever it is, and you want to stick it out there and say, see, better wait. Wait at least 44 hours. We've been so conditioned to have this immediate gratification and justification around our POV and our truth. And it's not that simple. It is not that simple. It's just not. It's like being called either a libtard or a Demorat or an anti-Semite, because quite frankly, you think that the IDF firing onto a bunch of protesters who are pissed off that their land and more of their land gets taken away and that they're actually treated like a feudal society, you don't like that, you know, you're considered now either a libtard, a Democrat, an anti-Semite. It's the danger of the times. So the idea is to wait a little bit, try to think things through. You know, I know that I get my initial hits, my guts and stuff like that. And I'm usually pretty right. I'm not always right. Not everybody agrees with me. And thank God not everybody agrees with me. I'm happy that they don't. But at least they listen to me. And I have good friends. Robert, I love you. I think you do great work. I've been following your show for a long time. I don't always agree with you. It's good. It's good. Glad. Keep your own mind. I don't always agree with everybody else either. You know, sometimes like I went through I came out and said Q Anon is bullshit. And then I got really suspicious around Jordan Sather and his rise to YouTube celebrity. And everybody that I've talked to about Jordan Sather basically says he's a nice kid. Here's what I think is funny though. Okay. They all say he's a father. Like, just because he's a father, does that mean that it legitimizes him in some ways? It's kind of like the kid thing. And again, it's a kid, right? It's a child. Well, he's a father. Oh, he's a father. He's a father. So that makes it okay. Well, would he be less credible? Would he have less of a moral foundation to stand on if he wasn't a father? No, gee, I don't know. You know, he's not a father. He doesn't have any kids. But there's something to be said for that, though, too. Because when you have a kid, guess what? Your world changes. And I know a lot of people who listen to this may not have kids, and it may be hard for you to hear this. But, people say, well, I have a cousin, or I have a niece, or I have a nephew, and he's just like my own. No, he's not. Unless he's living with you and you're raising him every single day and you're having an epigenetic bond, it's not the same. Sorry, it's just not. And I'm not elevating myself above anybody else because I've had a child. In fact, there are a lot of things I wish I could do differently as a parent, or could have done differently as a parent. In a lot of ways, right? Not perfect at all. But when you have a child, you get invested in the future. There's a buy-in to having a kid, for the most part. For some people, again, I saw this really interesting interview with Johnny Lydon. And again, it's about kids. The theme is about kids today. And John Lydon is a freaking genius. And I love the Sex Pistols. I think it's one of the best albums ever made. Period. End of story. And I was thinking, what we really are missing in our society today is true punk rock. And I'm thinking, well, maybe Q Anon is kind of like punk rock in its own way. It's kind of like discovering a new genre of music or a new band, right? So we don't really do that anymore. We discover YouTubers, or we discover, this person or that person. And that's kind of where it's gone. So Q Anon is kind of punk rock, right? I think so. So Johnny Lydon was talking about this song called Bodies. And it's really interesting. It's called Making of the Album or something like that. They have a bunch of these where they talk to the artists and they talk to the engineers and the producers and what went into that album. And he talked about the song Bodies. And there was a girl who showed up at his apartment or flat one night at about 3 a.m, and she had a plastic purse with a fetus in it. And showed it to him. And could you imagine that? You open the door and here's this whacked out punk rock chick with, safety pins. And I mean, it's kind of like it's kind of like the cat that brings the dead mouse in. What's that all about? Anyway, he wrote Bodies, and he gets into abortion in the song. And he talks about it, and he in typical Aquarius fashion, he says it's not an anti-abortion song. He said it's a song about the morality that is connected to children. Because having an abortion, this is what he said, could be a terrible experience, horrific, reduces us to the realm of an animal. And then on the other hand, he says, well, what happens when somebody brings a kid in the world and treats them like shit? Maybe aborting them might have been a good thing in the first place. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment per se, but I understand where he's coming from. So he's looking at this like, okay, well, you bring a kid in the world and the kid has no shot. Their life is hell. You traumatize them, you trigger them, you destroy them. Well, why don't you just abort the kid? Or here you go, you just had an abortion. It's like even animals don't have abortions, right? I mean, you're subhuman. Is what you are. And maybe you really should have thought about that. It's like, brilliant. It's totally brilliant. Anyway, fascinating documentary on the Sex Pistols. But again, there's that exploitation of the children. It's exploitation. Now, what's interesting is astrologically, we have the true node in Leo. And it's been there for a while. And, when the true node went into Leo, I said, look, this is where this is going. I talked to Regina. I was on Regina's show. I said, it's all going to be about children. We're going to be dealing with children's issues. And the PizzaGate thing was part of it. I remember being at Gaia, and I was sitting there with Regina, and her producer was there. And when I said PizzaGate, whoa. Let's not go there too much. And that's the other thing about Johnny Lydon. He was a total free speech person. Total free speech. He's such a funny guy. I'll never forget the time that I saw Johnny Lydon on frickin' Judge Judy. I saw him on Judge Judy. Because he was supposed to have this guy who was going to play drummer in Public Image. And he hired him for the tour, but he changed his mind. It was that illustrator, Robert Williams. Johnny Lydon and Judge Judy. So True Node is in Leo. And I think it's right around 11 degrees right now, which means the South Node is in Aquarius. And which is interesting, right? Because Aquarius it's the media. It's the internet, science. It is things like groups, organizations, the one world order, the dark new age, the new age in general. So this is the shadow side of what's taking place with the true node in Leo, with children. What's going on with that South Node in Aquarius? Or are we being exploited through that back door in our consciousness via the South Node? And if that's the case, wouldn't Q Anon kind of fit into that model a little bit? Because clearly Q Anon is kind of an 11th house medium. But it's fascinating to just look at and to see how children in innocence have become this political, social, and to some ways even technological kind of currency. And it's because theoretically their blood pumps in our blood because we're connected to the fact that we've all been children at some point. Although that's hard to kind of imagine, really, when you look at some of the people in the world. So you were actually a child? That person was a child at one point? But could you imagine hanging out with Putin as a kid? What about hanging out with little Benny Netanyahu? What do you think that was like? God, couldn't imagine it. And like, is Netanyahu ever going to get any older? And how long is he going to like run the show in Israel? Long time, long freaking time. I remember when Ariel Sharon was running the show. Oh my God, man, he was like, who was he like? He was like, what's that guy? What's that creature's name from Star Trek? That slothful creature in Star Trek. You know what I'm talking about. I usually know this. I usually remember this shit. But sometimes I just it'll come to me. It'll come. Somebody in the chat room help me out. Let's go to the chat room for a second. What do we have here? Who's chatting away? Oh, I think it might have. Okay, so what do we have here? Let's get into some of the chats. Let's see. There's a lot of chatting going on. I like it. Let's see. Hi, Judy. Sound. Is there a problem with me? Religious fervor always scares me. I probably hung out with Hypatia back in the Alexandrian days. That's Steve from Logo Sophia. Thanks, Robert. We seem to be in this bizarre amalgam of everything is permitted and thought police censorship. It's so true. That's a great point. Everything is permitted, and then we have the thought police. Maybe this echoes the Trumpian Uranus Gemini sun. Absolutely. I think it might have been the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador. Yes, thank you, Steve. It is the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador who set up the puppet show, which started the Gulf War. Thank you, Steve. Bullshit either way, said they pulled the plug on incubators. You just broke the law in South Carolina. Can't question the Holocaust narrative. Steve, I did not question the Holocaust narrative. I did not question the Holocaust narrative. What I said was that if you were living in the United States during that time and you didn't get news of the Holocaust, you may think that the Holocaust never happened. That's all I was saying. I wasn't questioning the Holocaust. Let's be clear on that. Or you could say that the media was complicit because certainly the media did not also inform the people that Ford and GE and IG Farben and Brown Brothers Behrman, maybe an early version of IBM, I don't know, maybe you didn't hear about that. So maybe they're also covering up the Holocaust, which came out later, which is why you didn't hear. I'm just giving you two versions of what might have happened. Hogs were sacrificed to Demeter in the Eleusinian Mysteries. Judy, how does that happen? You started to say what happened at Gaia, it was silent, and you came back with Judge Judy. I don't know what's going on. Let me just see here. Oh shit, I know what it is. This sucks. Pardon my language. Okay. So I have 5G and I have 2G, and I always opt for 2G, but because I have a 5G connection, it moves me back into 5G. And because I literally don't have the router up my ass, because you've got to be so close to the router with 5G that the signal can't travel down the hall in the furthest part of my house. That's why this happens. Ooh, Jabba the Hutt. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Maybe you could do Q chart. Alvy, I think that's a great idea. I'm going to do Q's chart. That's a great idea. Excellent idea. Excellent. Okay. All right. There we go. Whoa, what? Whoa, because I got because I got visceral on on the 5G thing. It wasn't meant for you, Judy. It wasn't meant for you. It was meant for the damn system, right? Because I get moved into the little 5G option. Because when you get a router now, they're like wired for 5G. You have two options, 5G or just 2G. And it always moves me into 5G. And again, if you know, sorry, wasn't meant for you. Wasn't meant for you. The exploitation of innocence. Innocence as emotional currency, social currency, technological currency. True note in Leo. So it moves the world. So what did Regina's boss say to me? The producer of the show? Well, first of all, it was a body language thing. And I think her sphincter tightened about 4 centimeters after I said that. And then she got this look on her face, which, you know, the eyes kind of, you know, he said, well, you know, let's not talk about that too much. I said, don't worry, don't worry. Like, I kind of know how to talk about these things for the most part. Not all the time. Sometimes I put my foot in my mouth just like everybody else. But I've been doing this now for 10 years. So I've kind of learned. I've learned the parameters to some degree. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting now that I have some video up. Listen, I apologize for the sound. I just, you know, like right now, if I went to 5G or the regular G, and the show's almost over anyway. It's almost over. So we'll see what happens. But it's just like, you know, I liked my old router. My old router was fine. Then I moved, said, well, you can't use that one anymore. When we're on a different network out here. Yeah, you're on the freaking, you know, mind control EMF slave network. That's what you're on. Anyway, hey, so let's bring this back to a positive place, okay? Let's bring it back to a positive place. Let's bring it back to the children that are within us, which we need to honor. It's important. It's important that we honor the children inside of us, that we play, that we have fun, you know, that we do things in ways that when we were kids, just, you know, we don't always do when we're adults. You know, I was thinking of, you know, okay, I read this article about the globalists and how the globalists are really psychopaths. They're narcissistic psychopaths who aren't even human, and that their narcissism creates a neural network that keeps them from being devoid of emotion, and that all they do is exist to manipulate other people's emotions, right? So being the good Virgo that I am, I look at that, you know, it's like, well, am I a narcissist? You know, am I a closet psychopath? Am I a closet sociopath? Well, let's get this straight. I think we all have some of that inside of us, okay? We all have some to a lesser degree than others. So I was looking back in my childhood, and I was trying to think, well, was I a kid that, you know, tortured animals? No. Was I a kid that played with fire and burned things? Not really. Not until I got into my teen years. But even that was kind of benign. Just for fun. I was in science class one time. You know those like Bunsen burner things? They're hooked up to gas lines in the science rooms? You know those things? We had one in my school. And I was sitting next to this girl named Kathy. And let's just say Kathy was quite mature for her age. I think I was a junior in high school. And I wanted to get Kathy's attention. And so I took the Bunsen burner gas line, I opened it up, and I had the, the flint starter, you know, where you start torches with, and I started it. And this blue flame shot across the classroom. Hey, look, it's one way of getting somebody's attention, right? I burned the Hillbillies when I was a kid. Hey, look, it happens. People do stuff, right? People. So I went to the office because I tried to get Kathy's attention by lighting the Bunsen burner. I did. I got her attention. But I went back and I looked at stuff, right, in my childhood. And I remember being at this school for the first time. I went to 5 different schools in 1 year. Between the age of 8 and 9, I went to 5 different schools. How about that? And the third school in the stop, which was in Southern California, I remember playing a game called Poison. It's a basketball game. And at that time, I was pretty good, and I had a lot of poisons. We racked up the poisons by scoring baskets. And this, and you get knocked out of the game when, if you don't have any poisons, somebody can hit you with the ball and you're out. So this one kid got hit, and since I had a number of poisons to share, I gave him one of my poisons so he could stay in the game. And I thought about that, and I thought, I think at my core, like, there are these events that happen to us when we're kids. And there's probably, over the course of your lifetime, maybe about half a dozen that are these archetypal moments. Like, they represent patterns of your life. You can look back on them, and they're there. They're like really instructive patterns, and they do have to deal with us being children. So I looked at that, and I said to myself, I don't think that really qualifies me, because in that moment I had empathy for that kid. Now, there are times in my life where I got turned hard, and some of that empathy, eroded. But I was like, nah, I don't think I'm in this bucket. I don't know. I don't think I'm in this category. But hey, look, that's what I do. I try to match myself up. Where am I? Where am I? Where am I with this? Where am I? Am I feeling jealous because Jordan Sather has 50,000 views? Am I feeling weird because, maybe I'm a secret psychopath, or, am I just being reactionary with Q? Look, this is the kind of fucking inner work I do. And I do it a lot, to be honest with you. And I think, look, this is just me. You don't have to do it. So when I come back to some of this stuff, I come back to it from a different perspective. And it's like, okay, I've checked myself. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Get into your kid. Here's what you should do. This would be a good exercise. Find a piece from your childhood that was interesting, fun, benevolent, even visionary, and see if you can do something with it, over the course of the next couple of weeks. We've got Uranus in Taurus. And at some point, that transiting true node is going to square Uranus. And it's going to force us in some ways to deal with this issue around children and the child inside of ourselves. And the child inside of ourselves that actually needs to grow up as well. And that's another piece of this thing altogether, right? That's a whole other part of the mysterium. It's not just the child that we relate to when we see things like PizzaGate or the high school shooting or, Syria or whatever. Of course, we relate to that part of ourselves. But it also has to do with another part of ourselves, which is the adult as well. And at some point, we have to dial down the sentimentality. This is the difficult part about being a parent, which I have had to learn, that you have to be a parent sometimes. You have to say no. One of the hardest things to do. So in this equation, where there is this exploitation of our innocence, at some point we have to say no. That we will no longer be exploited, no matter where it's taking us. Because if you look at it, it's a common theme. It's a common thread. Let me give you another example. Okay. Again, I watch TV probably too much. But there's a series of commercials. There's two of them, and it's about hunger. These commercials are about hunger. And Siri's listening to me. Fucking Siri. Siri's a spy. And the commercial is old Mother Hubbard didn't have any food in her cupboard. And there's a little dog. She gave the little dog a bone. And so the commercials are these women. They're coming home. They're coming home to houses. They're houses. These are houses. They're not apartments. They're houses. They look pretty well furnished, right? Pretty well furnished. And there's nothing in the refrigerator. And they've got kids to feed. And this one woman has her kid dressed up in a dog costume. He's wearing a dog costume, and she puts a little milk inside of his cup and then adds water to it. What the hell is going on with that commercial? I mean, obviously, there's this exploitation, the kid, and whole 9 yards, but it's a weird commercial. Like, I get it. People go hungry. No, I get it. It's not cool. But they could have had a different kind of message. Did you know that X amount of children go without food? Blah, 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 blah. Did you know that it affects, any number of households? They could break it down demographically. So it's not like just one household is going without food. They could have done that. They could have put some information around it, but no, they've got to go for this emotional thing. Now, here's the weird deal, is that the woman is wearing what looks like the outfit of a waitress. I mean, it looks like she's working at, I don't know, Waffle House or I don't know. But she looks like a freaking waitress. She's got a name badge on. I mean, I'm looking at this commercial and I'm saying to myself, well, if that's the case, why didn't you just bring home some damn food from the restaurant? And in which case, why isn't CPS at that house? Because it's clear that the woman has a job. I mean, it's not like she's living out of her car. She's got a house. There's somebody watching her kid. And she walks through the house and into this big kitchen, and there's one like half-finished thing of milk in a refrigerator. How come CPS isn't going to her place? I mean, this is weird. What's the point of that commercial? And the woman's African-American, black woman, black mother. She has this young black son who's dressed up like a dog. Well, I mean, what is the social programming around that whole thing? I mean, it's totally bizarre. And then there's another version, right? And the other version is, again, it's kind of a big house. This time the woman's white, so we have the duality thing going on. Well, it's a good thing that white people are just as hungry as black people. Got that covered. Check that box. She comes home and, she's like pouring soup out, whatever soup she's got left over for 3 kids. She's got a house. She has a freaking house. You know what people are freaking hungry? People live in hotels. People live in their cars. People are living in homeless camps. Those people are hungry. It's just weird. It's just so weird. But it's just, again, there's this like kind of exploitative piece around the whole thing. I think that's it. I think I've gone as far as I can today. I took you down some pretty bizarre alleys at times, right? But that's what happens here. Yeah. Well, you know what's going to happen? The Trudeau is going to move into cancer. Okay, cancer. So we're going to be moving away from children to homes. And that's going to be in January. And I'm going to go on the record, and I'm going to predict the next housing crisis. The next housing crisis, and it's already there. It's going to be connected to homelessness, and it's going to be a big deal because the true note is a pointer. It does not always say that this is going to be good, but it's going to get our attention. Transiting true node will get our attention. The south node is going to be the back end, kind of driving that thing, our blind spot, and where we are vulnerable. So that south node is going to be in Capricorn. And that's where this is headed. That's the next stop on pointing out, I wouldn't necessarily say the social ills, but to some degree the social condition and who is being a part of it and what is being either used, exploited, illustrated, illuminated, right? So it's going to be cancer, mothers, homes, women to some extent, but it will have to do with the home. And that back end, Capricorn, the goat. All right, I'm going to get out of here. Hey, thank you for joining me today and listening. I apologize for the 5G thing. That's going to end. That is going to end for a number of different reasons. I'll be back on Sunday night for the live stream. Some of you like to chime in on that, be a part of that experience. That'll happen on Sunday nights. So here we go, big weekend. Pray for our folks out in Hawaii and the deluge taking place in the southeast. There's a lot going on right now. And keep your eyes on what's going to happen with this thing in Santa Fe, Texas. I haven't even begun to dig into that yet. That just happened before I got on the show. All right, use your head to discern what's real, your heart too. So when it was possible, I'm Robert Phoenix. And if you're seeing this live stream like this, or this YouTube like this, or this presentation like this on YouTube for the first time, then you better get used to it. Have a great weekend. I'll be back on Sunday nights.